Welcome to Principles of Discipleship. I'm your instructor, Pastor Renaldo Brown. This is class number 7. The length of this class will be abbreviated and truncated so that we can incorporate the core principles of this class, which would normally be 2 hours, into 1 hour. So in 1 hour, we'll cover 2 hours worth of work. This week, we're in week number 7, which is from March 23rd. We've been looking at the cultivation process. We said that in our relationships, there is an evolution that happens in the relationship. And we said the key word in discipleship is relationship. The number one word in discipleship is relationship. And that in the discipleship relationship, this relationship evolves over time through testing, through circumstances. As the relationship matures, it matures out. And as it matures out, it gains strength, it gains intimacy, it gains depth, it gains substance. It gains value, it gains priority, it gains a lot of things. By way of review, you may remember that we talked about the definition for what is discipleship. Discipleship is, we said first of all, like I said a few minutes ago, it's relationship. It's a relationship that is first personal. It's very personal in the connection between two people. It's personal. It's not necessarily corporate and not necessarily general, but it's personal. Secondly, we said this relationship is also intentional. It's a personal relationship that is not accidental, but it's intentional. It's on purpose. Both parties are intentionally agreeing and deciding to have a relationship together. Then we said this relationship is spiritual. It's spiritual in its nature because that determines its purpose, that determines its motive, that determines its foundation. We said that it is spiritual. And then finally, we said that this relationship is also committed. It's committed, meaning that this is not an optional relationship. And there are many optional relationships we have in our life. There's a person that I meet at the gas station. I have the option to have fellowship with them. I don't have the option to have fellowship with them. There are people in the body of Christ. I have the option to have fellowship with them. I have the option that I don't. There is not a really depth to the relationship of commitment. But in a discipleship relationship, it is a decision on both parties to commit to the relationship, which means when you commit to something, it means you uncommit to something else. Where you've made a sacrifice of your time and your finances, perhaps, as well as your schedule, you're filling this with something else. And this is the most important thing, is that it's committed, because we both know what we're after, we both know what we're doing, we both know what this is about. And we talked about, in previous classes, we talked about the beginning of this relationship is the core. It is the foundation. It is the platform on which the relationship will grow, the core. And I said I had 16 different attributes of this relationship, but for the purpose of the classes, I've reduced it to about 8 or 9. Roughly, actually more than that, about 11. I've reduced it from 16 to 11. I didn't name all of my cores, but I gave some key ones. And I call this the dig because before you build anything, you have to dig. You have to level the ground, prepare the ground to grow something. We call the core the dig because we're digging. And when you're digging in a relationship, you're sowing seeds. You're beginning to set the framework, if you will, for this relationship upon which it will grow. We said the first principle was love. We said the second principle was humility. We said the third principle was intimacy. These are important, and you may think of some others, but these are the key ones I felt that I wanted to mention that were not the usuals that you normally get out of a book or you hear from someone who waxes philosophical about discipleship. Then we said the next stage, once you've laid your foundation and your core, you begin to develop, you begin to cultivate. We call that the build. I'm building something. I'm creating something. And in the build, we said, this is when the relationship begins to take place. This is when both parties begin to understand that they're involved in something that is for real, that is serious, that you're not just someone that's among their friends, but this person is a major important person in your life. They begin to take value. The disciple begins to have value in the life of the discipler, and the discipler begins to have value in the life of the disciple. Now you begin to move into the inner circle of both people's lives. The relationship becomes prioritized. Usually the person that is making the disciple sees the value of this relationship far greater than the person who is the disciple. But at the cultivation stage, they're beginning to get an idea. They're beginning to understand that this is for real, that this is important and that I need this. They may not understand where this is going or what this is about, but they're beginning to understand that there's value here for me. There is profit here for me. There is growth here for me. And we said when you begin to cultivate, there begins to be deep, deep investment here. I can be more specific here. Where I might have been a little bit general in the core stage, I might have been a little less definitive in the core stage. In the build stage, I begin to be more specific. And we said one of the first characteristics when you build is patience. When you build anything, you need patience. We talked about that last time we met. Patience is important because patience gives space for things to grow. Patience gives space for objectivity, to stand back and look at what I'm doing. And is this going in the right direction? Patience gives space for frailty, gives space for mistakes. Patience gives space for corrections, for adjustments. Patience gives space for the fluidity of a relationship, the rise and the fall, and whatever happens in that relationship. Patience gives space. It's key. And God's relationship with us is that he's very patient with us. How much more so would we invest in someone's life? And by the way, when you're being invested in, when you're being discipled, it also requires patience. Patience with the person discipling you. Patience with your own measure of growth and how you're responding to the discipleship. Patience with the relationship, letting the relationship develop. That requires patience. That takes time. Patience takes time. It takes testing, capacity, transparency. These are all elements of patience. And we talked about that last time we met. Today I want to continue speaking about cultivation. I want to continue to speak about the building. We are now building this relationship because we have a strong foundation. And on the strong foundation, we can build strong things. A strong house begins with a strong foundation. And then on top of that foundation, we build a strong house. So, today I want to talk about that today. I want to continue to talk about this cultivation, this preparing, this growing, this developing, this forming. The second area of development, I would say, relational development in the cultivation stage that I would like to bring out today is found, and as we do always what we do, and every time we talk about any kind of characteristical change or challenge or growth in the relationship, we will always use a relationship in the Bible to illustrate that. And it's no different today. We're going to look at the relationship between Moses and Aaron. And in this relationship, we will discover the second cultivational characteristic that will be key in developing a relationship of discipleship between two men. What you find here, or two women for that matter, what you find here in Moses and Aaron is quite similar to what we found in Abraham and Lot, if you remember. We talked about Abraham and Lot concerning intimacy. But in this next particular characteristic, we'll find this also in Moses and Aaron, but not intimacy, but something else. Now, the challenge here for Moses and Aaron is the same challenge as Lot and Abraham, because the relationship between Moses and Aaron is the same as the relationship between Aaron and Lot. It's not just spiritual, it's also natural. They are naturally related. And whenever there's a discipleship relationship that has a natural connection to it, or there's blood or there's family connected to it, the measure of familiarity is extremely high. It is very easy for either party to be familiar. It's kind of like taking a job with your uncle or taking a job with a family member. We tend to expect more from people because they are family. We tend to excuse a lot of things. We tend to be, even sometimes, to give less and expect more. So the relationship between Aaron and Moses, underneath of that discipleship relationship, there is also the family issue. We're brothers. We're family. And even his sister Miriam is there. So this dualistic challenge in the natural connection and also the spiritual connection at times can be cataclysmic. The natural connection can actually be a great hindrance to the spiritual connection. There can be this cataclysmic push between the two things where because we're family, it's difficult to disciple. In fact, most of the time in discipleship, it's easier to disciple someone who's not a family member because you can be more objective. But in this case, this is how God saw it. In fact, in Exodus chapter 4, Aaron was actually God's choice for Moses. Moses, it's interesting that God did that. God could have picked anyone to stand with Moses and speak for Moses and be under Moses and be connected to Moses. God saw fit to choose Aaron. Understanding the natural hindrance, he chose Aaron anyway. God knew something Moses didn't. So Aaron And we'll mention him first because he's mentioned first. And the key mention, the key mention is Exodus chapter 4, 10, verses 17 through chapter 7 through 7:1. He was a prophet to Egypt. You could say he was a prophet in Exodus chapter 4, verses 10 through 17. He was the son of Aram and Jochebed in Exodus chapter 6, verse 20. The elder brother of Moses by 3 years in Exodus chapter 7, 7. He lived to be 123 years old, and then he passed away in Numbers 20, verses 20 to 24. He was the first high priest of Israel in Exodus 28, verse 1. He was married to Elisheba, and he had 4 sons in Exodus chapter 6. And he had a great beginning. He really did. Aaron had a phenomenal beginning. The way that God called him into Moses' life, the way he came in and stood tall with Moses before Pharaoh, in the face of all of the pressure from Israel, and in the face of all of the pressure against Pharaoh in Egypt, he stood tall. He was an effective mouthpiece for Moses to Pharaoh. Very effective. And he was used greatly of God in Exodus chapter 6 and 7. And he would be awesome in his ministry towards Moses as an armor bearer and a mouthpiece. Is it not interesting that in Exodus chapter 7, when Aaron is the one whose rod is thrown and his serpent eats up the magician's serpents? He was used a lot. He was also selected in Exodus 17 with her to hold up the arms of Moses during the battle of Joshua and the Amalekites. He was also allowed to eat the showbread with the elders of Israel in Exodus chapter 18, verse 12. He had no right to eat that showbread, but he was allowed to do so. He was included. He was included with the elders of Israel and Moses and Jethro. He was selected by God to come up with Moses just prior to the receipt of the 10 Commandments. And you may notice that in Exodus 24, he's not mentioned again. From Exodus 18, Exodus 24, he's not mentioned again. Where was he the whole time? There's a mystery there. Then again, in Exodus 24, he has 2 sons. His 2 sons and 70 elders of Israel, they approached God together to worship. You keep seeing Aaron being included in the leadership of Israel when he was nothing more than a mouthpiece, but he keeps getting included inside. But the turning point in the relationship is right here. Because here's the thing about cultivation, and this is important in any kind of spiritual relationship. As you begin to build, as you begin to develop, just like farming, as you begin to farm, once you've prepared the land and you start to farm, there's a certain level of weeding that happens. Weeding is necessary because in the turning point in the relationship, cultivation reveals fallow ground, but it also reveals weeds. At a certain point in the relationship between Moses and Joshua, as they moved up, Moses left the people in the hands of the most responsible person that he could trust, and that was Aaron in Exodus 24. He had the full authority of God from Moses for the people. He was left in charge in Exodus 24. And the first time this happened, he was in charge. This is actually the first time in the history of Israel that they were not under the care and the management of Moses. Every step, all the way from Exodus chapter 13 and 14, all the way up to Exodus 24, every step that Israel took, Moses led them. This is the first time that Moses pulled himself away and delegated the full authority of God onto Aaron. Some say he might not have been ready for that or prepared for that. But this is the first time he was given this authority. And then he took Joshua with him. And in Exodus 24, 15 through 18, Joshua waited patiently at a certain position while Moses went forward. Now, while Moses and God had an exalted conversation about a variety of things, Aaron and his sons, the high priest, ministering priests, priestly duties, priestly cleansing of sins, priestly consecration, garments, uniforms, all those things. Which is interesting about that conversation, and I'll stop here for a second. The conversation with Moses and God about the high priest was not about Aaron, but about the office. It was not about a person, it was about the office. Meaning that the qualifications were for the office, not for the person. The focus was on the office, not the person. The honor was on the office, not the person. Because meanwhile, while they're talking about this office that Aaron would fulfill, Aaron is living less than the requirement for that office. For as he is in a conversation with God, Moses, Aaron is fulfilling the people's request to make a God who will go before us. Because remember Israel. Israel's never had someone go before them. They've had Moses all the way since Exodus 14 as their representative of God going before them. So the first time they no longer see Moses in front of them, they feel confused. They feel lost. They want something tangible, something materialistic that I can look at and say, okay, there's God. Or there's someone who can point me to God. And Aaron didn't quite fit the visual bill. It seems Aaron didn't quite make that. Because he didn't quite make that, they asked Aaron, give us someone besides you who will go before us, which is amazing. What a horrible statement. Pick us a God who will go before us because we're not recognizing the God who goes before us. So, remember when they said in Exodus chapter 20, whatever commandments you say, God, we will keep them, we will honor them. And here they are, they've already broke two already. They've already broke two commandments already. And they built the golden calf. Aaron built the golden calf in Exodus chapter 32. And this is the first time in recorded history that publicly or privately an altar, a golden calf has been made for the people of God. First time. And God is angry at his people in Exodus chapter 32. And he offers to destroy the people and start a new nation with Moses in Exodus 32:10. Moses defends Israel with the integrity of God's character in Exodus chapter 32, verse 11 through 14. He literally defended God's anger with God's mercy. What an interesting conversation. Then Moses comes down. Joshua thought the music he heard was war. And in Exodus chapter 32, verse 17, Moses says, that's not the noise of men who seek to win, but men who've lost already. What an interesting statement. It doesn't sound like they're trying to win. It sounds like they've lost in Exodus 32:18 already. Moses saw their natural and sensual dancing. He got angry. He pretty much, and God allowed him to hear it, but later would not do anything with it. You have the opportunity and the right to deal with it. And Moses melted down the golden calf, mixed it with water, and made Israel drink it. Then, side note, when he confronts Aaron, one of the most ridiculously horrible answers to sin in the Bible, Aaron says they were bad people and bad magic. That was pretty much his conversation. The people were bad, and suddenly the calf just sprang out of the fire. He threw gold in, and the calf sprung out. There was no manipulation by him. The sons of Levi were charged with killing the idolatrous people, about 3,000 people in Exodus 32:28. But I want you to learn the lesson of leadership here in this relationship. Imagine you're Moses and you've been nurturing Aaron for a period of time. You put a lot of life in Aaron. You put a lot of trust in Aaron. You're now speaking to God about what Aaron could do. Meanwhile, Aaron is vastly disappointing you. On the largest level, he's disappointing you. How could you? Never has so much been put into one person and they so drastically, simultaneously disappointed the person that put it in them. He disappointed him. Notice the first response, God and Moses, was anger. And that's common in discipleship relationships. Anger will be there. When you're being discipled and when you disciple someone, there will be anger at some point. And that's common. But the second response from God to Moses is uncommon in discipleship relationships. It's uncommon in religious relationships. And that relationship response was mercy. It's mercy. When someone's angry at you, you might not like it, but you're used to someone being angry at you. At some point, you're going to be unfazed by the anger of people. I'm angry at you. Yes, because we all get angry at each other. That's normal. But here, when he came with mercy, you will never be used to mercy. You will never get used to mercy. It's unexplainable. Why? Because I would be angry. Why aren't you angry? So you cannot build a relationship of discipleship. You cannot build a sustainable life or walk with God without mercy. You can't develop people without mercy. You need a generous dose of mercy. See, you can't do that. Usually when a discipler gets angry, he throws the disciple under the bus. And I have seen that, and I have been that, where a disciple has made a mistake, and the first thing the person that's discipling him does says, I can't believe they did that. They disown them. They throw them under the bus. They're stupid. They don't know what they're doing. They're immature. It's always their fault. And it might be their fault. But that's easy. Assigning blame is easy. Indicting character is easy. Defining sin is easy. I can do that in the flesh. I don't need God in my relationship to assign blame. But mercy, when a leader is discipling someone and he gives mercy, instead of throwing a disciple under the bus, you stand between the bus and the disciple. You stand between, you actually shield them. You don't condone sin, you don't condone mistakes, you don't cover it up, but you have mercy for them. You have mercy for them. Mercy. Mercy. After the failure, what's amazing to me, after the greatest failure of his life, and Aaron would have no greater failure than this, as public as it was, as corporate as it was, he jeopardized the entire future of the nation of Israel with that move. Because what if Moses had said, yes, kill them all, and start over with me? What if he had granted God his request? Aaron jeopardized the future of Israel with that move. Even after that failure, God continued to build and develop and promote Aaron. Wow. You don't think the 2 million Israelites didn't know what Aaron did publicly? They watched him take the golden calf. They watched him make the golden calf. They watched him allow pandemonium to happen. They all saw this. Children, women, men, they all saw this. And then they watched God promote him as the high priest. How is that possible? Mercy is how that's possible. Because mercy is when I don't get what I'm supposed to get. I don't get what what I deserve to get. Here's why that's possible. In Romans chapter 11, verse 29, the gifts and the calling of God are without repentance, without him changing his mind. When God was talking about Aaron and being the high priest, when God chose Aaron, the brother of Moses, to go with Moses and be a prophet to Egypt and also be an assistant and armor bearer underneath Moses, God knew this colossal mistake was going to happen and chose him anyway. He did not regret his choice. He did not fret his choice. He didn't fear his choice. He chose Aaron knowing exactly what Aaron was going to do and promoted him anyway. It's amazing. But what the funny thing about it is you would think in the life of Aaron, okay, he's made this colossal mistake. You would think he would have learned his lesson. There would never be any more mistakes in his life because he was publicly humiliated, and now he's the high priest, and he's holy. He's the man of God. His mistakes at end. They haven't. He would continue to require mercy. In Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 3, his 2 sons, Nadab and Abihu, would be burned alive with divine fire for offering strange incense. Later, Aaron and the other 2 sons performed their priestly duties, and in fact, they didn't do it correctly. They did it imperfectly, and the penalty for that was death. Moses noticed it. He rebuked the 2 boys and Aaron for the error, but then he kind of blamed it on the grief of losing 2 sons. They performed, everything got done, but it wasn't done to the letter. What's amazing about this in Leviticus chapter 10 is that everything that they did, it wasn't done perfectly, but it was completed, but not completed perfectly. God said nothing and Moses said nothing. God should have killed Aaron at that time. For the mistakes that him and his remaining 2 sons made in their performance in Leviticus chapter 10, the penalty would have been death because it violates the perfection and holiness of God. And God did not kill them. God actually was quiet. He said nothing. Moses was angry. God said nothing. And when Moses realized that God said nothing, he said nothing. That's a phenomenal lesson in discipleship. There are things when you are discipling someone, they may do something that offends you. You got to be careful that in their offense of you, you cannot connect that to the offense of God. In other words, they don't walk by your moral standard. They walk by God's moral standard. They may make choices that you have a problem with, but God says nothing. You've got to be careful. Well, I'm angry at so-and-so because they didn't do what I thought they should do. Or they didn't do it the way I thought so. But we can't be morality police with people that we disciple. They're going to make choices for God. Be careful that you don't try to make them measure up to your standard, because they walk before God. They're discipled by you, but they're walked before God. And God can deal with them for sin in Proverbs 3, verse 12, and Hebrews chapter 12, 6 through 12. God can discipline them. But my role as a discipler in someone's life is not a discipliner. We're not the corrector. You're never going to build a relationship based on correction. It can include correction, but not based on correction. Mercy has to be there. Mercy has to be there. For you will draw more men with mercy than correction. You'll make more disciples with mercy than correction. And one day, you as a discipler, you may need that mercy. Doesn't mean we avoid correction. Doesn't mean we can't give people the truth in love in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, and that we can't love truth and hate sin. Doesn't mean that at all. Doesn't mean that. In Amos chapter 3, verse 13, practice what to hate, hate evil. But call evil, evil, and good, good. But I have to be careful. I should give liberal amounts of mercy. Liberal amounts of mercy. Once again, in Numbers chapter 12, he would need mercy again. Miriam brings an attack against her brother because she doesn't like his authority, but she shrouds it in an attack upon the woman that Moses married. You married that Ethiopian. That wasn't really what the problem was. That was the initiation. She led with that visual assault, and then she went to something deeper and said, you take too much authority on yourself. That's her problem right there. And Aaron stood beside his sister against his younger brother and his pastor and the man who discipled him. The very same man who extended mercy to him before. He's forgotten about that mercy. But here it is again. And if you read that chapter in Numbers 12, it's very interesting. Moses says nothing. In Numbers 12, verse 1, it says, both spoke, Aaron and Miriam. They both spoke and they both said in Numbers 12, verse 2. And then in verses 6 through 8, God rebukes them. And God in verse 9 is angry at them. But only Miriam was disciplined in verse 10. Only Miriam was disciplined. And in verse 12 and 13, Moses pleads for mercy. But I want you to watch something very carefully in Numbers 12, verses 10 through 13. When it says mercy there, it's plural. They both pleaded for mercy for Miriam. Because Aaron, even in his mistake, he pleaded for mercy. He learned how to ask for mercy, how to plead for mercy. And Moses pleaded for mercy. It's interesting in this story in Numbers 12, I'm fascinated by it, because Moses, when he's attacked by his brother and his sister, two of the most powerful people in Israel, he says nothing. Doesn't defend himself, doesn't excuse himself, doesn't protect himself. He says nothing. And then the first time he opens his mouth, is to protect those who are attacking him. He falls on his knees and begs for mercy for them. It's amazing. It's kind of like the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. The father says nothing. When the son says, give me everything I want, the father says nothing. When he's out the far country spending it on lascivious living, the father says nothing. The father doesn't speak until he comes over the hill, and when the son tries to explain his life and explain what's going on, then he shuts him off, and then he begins to speak, and when he speaks redemptively. That's a man of God. The father in Luke 15, Moses here in Numbers 12, they don't have a lot of words, Ecclesiastes 5, verse 2 and 3, but when they do, they speak redemptively. Redemptively. Psalm 17, verses 2 and 3, we have sentences from the presence of God. We speak redemptively. Psalm 68, verse 11, God gave the word, and great were the company of them that published it, speaking redemptively. We speak life. We speak life. That is so key. Just noticing Moses keeps offering and God keeps giving mercy. Moses offers Aaron mercy. Moses gives Aaron mercy. In your relationship with people, the longer you are with people, the longer you are with God, the greater you'll see a need for mercy. Because in Psalm 103, verse 14, we're frail. We're but dust. We make a lot of mistakes. We forget easy. We learn slowly. We're stubborn. We're self-oriented in Proverbs 14, verse 12. We're proud in Proverbs 20, verse 6. We see life through our own veil in 1 Corinthians 13, 12. Things are not so clear, which means we can make mistakes often. And in your relationship as a discipler, be a man of mercy. Be a man of mercy. For without mercy, you don't create a platform for mistakes. Without mercy, you demand perfection. Without mercy, there's no space for correction. There's just an end. You bankrupt the relationship of value when you don't bring in mercy. Mercy is so key. Mercy is so key. We talked about this last week with patience. We said when you give patience to people, the word there is macrothumia. When you give patience to people, you create a capacity for mercy. We said when you give patience in circumstances, that's hupomone, thank you, hupomone. You give hope to people. So patience in circumstances gives me hope, but patience with people gives mercy. Mercy. That is so key for a disciple. Mercy. And for yourself, as you're learning how to make disciples, you need to give yourself mercy. The reason why many people that make disciples are not merciful is they don't give themselves mercy at all. They're not merciful. They're not merciful to themselves. Learn how to apply liberal amounts of mercy to yourself. You're not finished yet. God is not done with you. It does not yet appear what you shall be in 1 John chapter 3, verse 2. But when we see him, we'll be like him. God is working in your life in Romans 8:29 and Romans 12:2. God is working in your life in 1 Thessalonians 5:24. God is working in your life in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. God is working in your life in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. God is working in your life, so give yourself some mercy and give him space to work. I can respond to God. I can respond to the work of God by faith, but I also want to have mercy when I don't respond. There's space for mercy. The first activity of the character of God on the cross was mercy. The first attribute we experienced in the work on the cross through our relationship with Christ was mercy. Mercy. Give yourself mercy as you begin to make disciples, and you'll give your disciples mercy and give your relationship room to grow. For those of you who are turning in your reports today, which is March 23rd, the review report number 3 is due today. We talked about from the book we read, Iron Sharpens Iron. There are 5 key principles that you have to write a paper on. Today is due number 3. You can email that to me or you can drop it off at the Bible College. Thank you and God bless you.